This video aims to teach you the Vue fundamentals using Vue 3. However, don't worry, because if you get these fundamentals, it doesn't really matter what Vue version you are using. If you learn these fundamental building blocks of Vue, you can build applications with any Vue version. The first step is to create the Vue directory, which you can do as follows: mkdir vue3 intro, and then let's open it. So cd vue3 intro. Let's create the two files we need for this tutorial. We only need two files because it's a very simple app whose purpose is to show you and teach you the basic concepts. So let's create index.html, and then let's create app.js. Let's open this folder in Visual Studio Code or whatever code editor you use, and let's start by filling the index.html file. If you have Emmet, you can type HTML5 and it will autocomplete the file for you. Let's give it a title. In this case, it's Vue 3 intro course. Let's create a new div with ID of app. You use this div to mount the application into the DOM. And lastly, let's import the app.js file. We can do so as follows: script src, the file it's this one. The last thing is to import Vue in our project, and we can do it as follows. Again, script src, and then there is this link which has the latest version of Vue, pkg.com, Vue at next, and actually it's on pkg, and this holds the latest version of Vue. If we access this one, you can see that it's the latest Vue version. So let's open a new window and let's go to this one. You can see that it's Vue version 3.0.11, which is the latest Vue version, and it also includes all the Vue code. With that being said, we can move on. The application is pretty empty because we didn't add anything, so let's add a heading. Let's add an h1 saying Catalin's courses. Let's save it and let's refresh the page, and you can see it works. Now the next step is to create the Vue instance. We can do it as follows. Let's open the app.js file. And let's create the following constant: const app view create app, and then let's pass an object data, and then return course Vue 3 intro. This is a very simple field, and we use it just to show how to display data from Vue in an HTML file. Now we also need to mount the application into the DOM, which we can do as follows. You can see that we target the app div we created earlier. So let's save it, and now we can use this course field in the HTML as follows. We can use any Vue property by using double curly braces. This variable will be replaced with this text, and let's save it and see if it works. Let's refresh the page and you can see it works. We have Vue 3 intro. Amazing. Let's go back to the code and let's explain what this bit does. With this code, we created a new instance of Vue, and we passed an object which in this case contains only this field course, and after that we mounted the application into the DOM by making use of this ID, which is from here. You can see div ID app. In Vue, we can loop over lists, arrays, and so on using the v-for directive. First of all, let's add a new field, which is a field of tags. These tags are an array. So let's say we have Vue, JavaScript, and web dev. Let's save it, and now let's go into our file, into our HTML file, and let's add an unordered list and then a list item, and here we use v-for tag in tags, and then use double curly braces to render each tag on the page. Before we test it on the page, it's important to explain what happens. So these tags, this represents the array from this file, which you can see here, and this tag is an individual tag from that array, and then we take that tag and render it on the page. So let's save it one more time and let's refresh the page. Now you can see that we have the list of tags, but now we are still missing something because we don't have a unique key attribute. Whenever you loop over lists or array or whatever in Vue, it's important to add the key attribute. That means each DOM element should have a unique key. Usually the key of each element is the ID of that element. By providing the key attribute, you allow nodes to keep tracks of the node's identity as things update in the application. As a result, Vue can reuse and reorder existing elements. Besides that, it also improves the performance of the application. Coming back to the previous example, we can modify it as follows to include the index as well. So now we have tag, index, and we have a key attribute which is the index. And actually we can render this index as well. So you see what index is. Let's save the file and let's refresh the page. And you can see Vue is at position 1, JavaScript at position 2, WebDev at position 3. However, what happens if we have the following array? So let's remove this and let's say we have an array of objects as follows: id1, name, Vue, and then id2, name, JavaScript, and then lastly id3, name, WebDev. Let's save it and let's see what happens. Now you see we have an ugly object right here. What you can do if you want to preserve this position, this represents the position of each tag in this tags array. For example, Vue is the first one, JavaScript the second one, and WebDev the third one. You can do as follows: you can just add a tag name here and it's going to work. However, I don't recommend that. I recommend doing it as follows. So tag in tags, then the key is the tag ID, and then we have it as follows: tag ID and tag name. And now you can see that you have the ID of the tag and the name of the tag, and it looks cleaner and it's better. It's also important to note that this is the shorthand for vbind key. And what this vbind does is to bind the ID of the tag to the key attribute. That is, each item has a unique key which you specify in the key attribute. That's all about looping over lists or arrays. The next concept is the conditional rendering. Sometimes you want to render a block of elements or information based on a condition. That is, you might want to use if statements to decide whether to render an element or not. One example would be to show only the programming courses that has over 4 stars. To do so, you can use the vif directive, which renders a block only when the expression returns a truthy value. But as usual, let's see an example. First of all, let's go into the app.js and let's add some more fields. So description, this is an introductory course to Vue. Let's make it bigger. Let's add the price as well of $19.99, and then let's add availability, available true for the moment, and let's save it. Now based on this field we will render some information. Let's go back here and let's add a new paragraph, and then let's say if available, then if it's available you can buy the course. However, if it's not v else, you cannot buy the course. So this is how you use conditional rendering in Vue. You use the v if and v else. Let's save the file and let's refresh the page. You can see that now it says you can buy the course. However, let's change the value here to false and let's see what happens. Ta-da! You cannot buy the course anymore. Therefore, the v-if directive takes the field you want to evaluate and renders data based on that. If this one returns a truthy value, then it renders this element. Otherwise, it renders this one. That's all about conditional rendering. The next fundamental concept is handling events. In Vue, you can use the v-on directive to listen to DOM events and then run a piece of code when they are triggered. The v-on directive has a shorthand as well, which is the symbol @ So let's create a button. Let's listen to a click event. Let's write a new method purchase and let's add a buy now text. Let's save it. Now that we have the button, when somebody clicks on it, it triggers the purchase method. We don't have it now, but we will create. So let's make it work by adding the methods field on the Vue instance. And by the way, let's stop and talk about this methods field. This methods field allows you to create methods on your Vue instance and then use them in your application. In this case, we will have the purchase method, which is as follows, and it will only alert like you bought this course, but it won't do anything else. So let's save it. And let's refresh the page, and if you click on it, it should show an alert saying you bought this course. And as you can see, it does just that. However, you can use inline code as well if you don't want to use a method. There are some cases where it's easier and maybe even better and cleaner to use inline code rather than writing a special or an extra method. And let me show you an example. Let's write another button and then let's add a click event and let's toggle the availability. Let's create a button that allows us to change the value of this field as soon as we click on it. So let's write something like available equals to the opposite value of available. And let's choose a button name like, I don't know, toggle me. Let's save it and let's go into the application. Now when we click on this button, this text should change. You can see that now you can buy the course because the available field from here is true, and now it's false, true, false, true, false. However, if you have a complicated or a complex business logic, you should create another method here on the Vue instance. The next concept is the attribute binding. For example, we can have an HTML element like image, and instead of using hard-coded value for the image source and alt text, we can use dynamic values. Let me show you what I mean. Let's add an image URL. I have an image which I always use for tutorials, so let's use just that, and then let's add image alt, and let's add something like an image with a desktop computer, and let's use this. Let's add an image here, an image tag as usual, and now as always you can use the shorthand as follows, or you can write the whole thing. So let's write image URL, and then here let's use the shorthand and let's use image alt. Let's save it and let's go into the application. Let's see what happens. Here we have the image right now, which is way too big, so let's make it smaller. Width 250 and height the same. Yeah, much better. And let's add an h2 here so it's not in line. You can see the title, the image, the list, whether you can buy the course or not, and toggling that. As you can see, we use the image URL and alt text we specified in the Vue instance, and we can do that thanks to the vbind directive. The vbind directive allows developers to bind an attribute dynamically to an expression. In layman terms, it enables us to use dynamic values rather than hard-coded values. Thanks to this reactivity system of Vue, you can update the image URL and the image alt in your Vue instance, and the HTML will update accordingly and automatically. You can add an href attribute in the same vein and get the URL from the Vue instance. As an exercise, you can give that a go. Another super helpful and nice feature of Vue is the computed properties. With computed properties, you can manipulate data and reuse the result in your Vue application. Using the same example with courses, let's say you want to make sure that your images always has an alt description or an alt text. You could do that with a computed property as follows. As with methods field, we also have the computed field, which is as follows, and we can write a new method called hasImageAlt and then check if it has it or not, and if it has it, we keep it. If not, we add a default one. So return this image alt length 0, this image alt, otherwise let's use a default value, which is this is an image without alt text. I know it's not super useful, but we'll do the trick for this tutorial. So this method checks if the image length is greater than 0. If it is, it means it has an alt text, and then if it has it, it will use it, as you can see here. If not, it will add this unuseful text saying that this image doesn't have an alt text or attribute. And now we can use this method as follows. Let's go back, and instead of using the image alt attribute, we can use the new computed property. Let's run the application and let's see the alt. You can see it has a description because we added one, but if we remove it from the Vue instance, let's leave it empty and let's refresh the application. You can see that now the computed property is in action, and it added this default text saying that this is an image without alt text. So these computed properties can be super useful. Let's add this back, but be very careful because it's very easy to introduce bugs in your application by mutating the existing data in computed properties. You should use these computed properties for the presentation layer and not for changing the existing data. If you want to mutate your existing data, it's advisable to use methods, but I'll talk about that a little bit later. And now let's talk about the next concept, which is methods. Even though you can write and run JavaScript expression in your templates, it doesn't mean you should. For expression like the toggle button like this one, it might be fine, but once you have a complex business logic or a complex piece of code like purchasing something on the internet, it's better to have a separate method and keep the code more organized and better. Therefore, with methods, you can extract code logic into a separate function and reuse that function everywhere you need the code. Your Vue instance has a methods property where you can add all your methods. You already made use of that. You created a purchase method, which is pretty simple, but you get the idea. So this is where you add all your methods. There is not much to say about this feature because you should be familiar with methods, so it's nothing new. That brings me to the next point, which is methods versus computed properties. As I said, you should use computed properties only for the presentation layer. Don't use it to mutate or modify existing data. To mutate existing data, it's better to use methods. And lastly, we have the components and props, and we are done. A Vue application is usually split into components which are individual pieces of the application. For instance, you might have the following components in your application: the header, the footer, about us section, content card, and so on. These are just some examples, but the sky is the limit. Additionally, a component might have other components nested inside. We can think of them as parents and children. In other words, the components are the pillars of the application. So let's create a Vue component and see how it works. Let's open the terminal, component, and then let's create a course card component. Touch component course card.vue. Let's go back here and let's open the file. You can see that we have the course card component. The first step is to create the component by calling the component method on the Vue instance. So let's write app.component. Let's name the component, which is course display, and then you need to pass an object as a second argument. This object will contain the configuration of this Vue component. Now we will simply copy everything from the app.js file and add it to our course card. So let's copy everything and let's add it here. And we also have to add a template. This one is a property like this. Let's save it. Now everything about the courses is encapsulated in its own component. However, for the application to work again, we have to make some modifications, because if we run the application now, it's not going to work. Let's go to the app.js file and let's return the following field: all courses 0. Let's save it, and then we also have to move this one. Let's take it from here, go into index.js.html. Let's add a script, not src, and then let's add const mounted app mount app. We also have to import the newly created component, so let's do that. Script src, and then we have the components folder and the course card. And because we added a template in the course card component, you can see it here. We have everything here. We can actually remove everything from here and call the course display component as follows. So what happened here? First of all, we removed everything from here because we rendered the component, which is this one. Then we imported the component and then we mounted the app globally so all files have access to it. You can see that now it works properly even though we made so many changes. The layout is a bit different because I used a template code which I already had ready to copy. I didn't want to write it from scratch because it would take too much time. It's basically more or less the same stuff that was here. It was just translated here. Actually, we can even go back here and copy everything from here to make it more familiar. And let's use the course display again, which doesn't work. Course display. And let's go to the course card. Let's replace everything from here with this, and it should still work. It's the same thing without this. Yep, you can see our previous template. So this is how you create a component and how you use it. You create a new Vue file, you call the component method on the app, you name the method, and then you display all the configuration for that component. You configure the data, the methods, the computed properties if it has any, and the template. Okay, let's move further to props or properties. Props or properties allows components to communicate between them. As I said earlier, there can be parent components and child components. And also each component has a specific use, but sometimes it needs to access data outside its scope. Let's modify the existing application to accept a property called paid. The purpose of this property is to indicate whether the course is paid or free. let's add the props property on the component. So props, let's add a comma and then paid, and then we have to specify the type, which is boolean. Let's save it, and now we have the paid props, which means here we can pass a prop, and you'll see how immediately. Let's go into the app.js as well, and let's pass paid as true, which means by default all courses are paid, but we will change that soon. And now let's create another method which is called premium, and this returns whether the course is paid or not. If the paid field is set to true, then it's a premium course, otherwise it's not. And now let's go to index and let's pass this prop. So paid, and we pass premium, and this is how you pass a prop. It's the same as writing vbind. As usual, we use the shorthand form because it's nicer and shorter, obviously. Now we have to change the HTML a bit, so let's go into the template and let's quickly change the template. If the paid prop, which you can see here, is set to true, it renders additional information that allows the users to buy the course. On the other hand, if the course is free, the information is hidden. Therefore, in this example, you can see the simplest way of using a prop. So that's the end. By now you should be able to build very simple Vue.js applications. All the code from this tutorial is available in the Vue 3 intro repository, which I will link into the description. If you liked this video and if you found it helpful, I would appreciate a lot if you would share it with others, like, subscribe, and so on.